All right. Just want to get started on this right now and like to introduce myself and welcome everybody on board. This is the first of the webinars for the Multifamily Investing Academy for 2012. For those of you that have been to some of our webinars in the past, you understand that the whole idea is to try to provide you with as much information as we possibly can. Today our topic is going to be on the repositioning of apartment complexes, and as the topic said in the email that went out to everyone, it's what the gurus never teach you. And as I mentioned, my name is Charlie Dobbins, and along with my partner Jillian Sidoti, we are the co-founders of the Multifamily Investing Academy. Jillian is an attorney specializing in securities law, and I'm an attorney specializing in really working with investors for all of their multifamily acquisitions. From broker development to deal review, from pre-qualifying you with lenders to teaching you how to structure your deals the best way. We have the whole team in place to get you through really any type of acquisition. Now, in that vein, and this is my plug, is that we have started at the MFIA the Acquisition Advisory Program. Some people would call it a coaching program, but believe me, that really does not do it justice. As you know, many of you might know, they say that 98% of commercial real estate students never do their first deal, and what we're doing is representing those other 2% and helping them get to their first deal and get their first deal done. If you'd like more information about it, you can send us an email to info@multifamilyinvestingacademy.com. But if you'd really like to find out more about the program and how it works, don't ask us, just ask some of our clients who are in the program now. And many, if not all of them, were in some other guru's coaching program and can tell you the big differences between our program and anything else that we've seen out there. You know, one of the reasons why Jillian and I started this program is because over the last several months we've become privy to some coaching contracts with these gurus that charge exorbitant amounts of money up front. And the contracts that they put you under essentially make you an indentured servant to the guru. If any bank knew that you had to assign 50% of the rental income of the property to your coach as payment for learning how to buy that property, you would never be approved for a loan. And believe it or not, these are some of the deals that we've seen go on out there. So that is why we started our acquisition advisory program, and that is how we're trying to help out these new investors so they don't get burnt by some of these programs. All right, now having said that, let's get started. Today's webinar is essentially completely sold out. If you drop off the line, you may have trouble getting back on. We will be making this webinar available on the MFIA members site in the next few days, which we do with all of our webinars, all of our contracts, any forms that we have, all of our teaching material. It's all behind the scenes on the member site. You know, you can also sometimes get some free legal advice as well during our live TV Ustream sessions that Jillian and I put on for our members. One of the biggest things that I see on a regular basis when dealing with new investors is that they have this idea that they're going to make millions if they could just buy a C property in a B area or a B property in an A area and just reposition it. And the problem that I feel exists is that they never truly understand what it takes to reposition a property. You know, if it was really that easy to make millions that way, don't you think the existing owner would have done it long ago? Let me start off by saying that I'm actually coming to this this conversation and this discussion from a position of power, so to speak. I actually have been on both sides of this equation. One of my properties was nominated last year for a Paragon Award with the National Apartment Association as one of the best turnaround properties of 2011 by an owner-operator. So in that regard, I've done it. I know how to do it. It's an exciting way to run this business. But let me just also tell you that I unfortunately was involved in, as a member of a investor group that didn't do so well with a repositioning property, where we went into a property and tried to turn it around, and it was a C property in a B area. And I can tell you that at the end of the day, we failed. And we ended up giving that property back to the existing owner. And I can tell you the number one thing that determined the failure and success in both of those cases was the team that we had in place. In the successful case, the team we had on was brilliant. They worked well together. They knew what the objectives were. They knew what the goals were every single month, and they achieved them. The other team had no idea what it would take to reposition a property, and it showed marvelously, let me just say. So today, let me introduce for you Robert Lang, the repositioning guy. Robert is the go-to guy when it comes to learning and understanding about how to reposition an apartment complex. So if you are thinking about doing just what I said, acquiring property and then repositioning that property, and you've never done it before, this conversation is going to be very, very important to you, and I think you're going to really get a great handle on just what it takes to reposition a property. So, without further ado, I would like to welcome Robert to the call and say hello. How are you, Robert? Good. I agree. I think that this particular topic is glossed over at a lot of these training seminars, and it sounds great, but if you don't know what you're doing, you can truly get burned. And that's what we're here to tell people, how to do it the right way. So let me get your slide up. Can you see the screen, Art? Okay, great. So it's going to be a slow transition here for some reason. I'm just trying to move you to the next slide. So, okay, here we go. Why don't you take it over, Robert? Sure. Great. Now, actually, this question right here, what is repositioning? You think, a lot of people may think that doesn't everybody understand what repositioning is? When we sent out the invite to everyone to join this webinar a week or so ago, a couple of people actually wrote back and they didn't understand or know what repositioning was or what opportunities existed with repositioning. So I think it is very good that we start right from the beginning here with this. You know, one of the things that, if I can just go back to the property that we failed on, this point that you raise here really brings back some bad memories. And the thing was that we didn't start thinking about the repositioning and all the aspects of the repositioning until after we purchased the property. It was like we purchased a property, the baby was born, everybody had the big party, and then somebody had to get down there and run it. The other problem that we had was the team that we had in place of 5 people. We had 5 leaders. Nobody was a follower. Everybody thought that the other person was doing something on the job. So the team was never well defined. We didn't have one leader for the repositioning, and it just failed miserably. Exactly. Yeah, and that person has to have control. They can't, sit around and wait for somebody else to act. They've got to be able to pull the trigger on decisions. Yeah. Let me see. Okay. Now, at the end of the webinar, you are going to make available to anyone that contacts you one of your customized repositioning plans. Can you kind of give us an idea as to, kind of a broad overview of what you would find in a repositioning plan? That is great because what some people don't even understand is they'll get in. Here's what we did on one property. We went in there and it was an older property with beautiful hardwood floors, but it had carpeting over the hardwood floors. And we thought, oh man, if we just rip out this carpeting and finish the hardwood floors, this place will look fantastic. But what we didn't realize is that the market didn't want hardwood floors. They didn't want bare floors. They wanted carpeted floors because they didn't own carpeting and they weren't bringing carpeting to their new unit. So we couldn't move any of those units. So we didn't do that market survey that you're talking about. Exactly. And your final bullet point here in this one. Hold on. Oh, there's your story time. I'm sorry. There was your high rise. Sorry about that. Yeah. That's interesting. You talk about the stereotyping of a property, and as a, if you come in from somewhere, another part of the country into a particular marketplace and you're looking to buy a property, you've got to find out, get your boots on the ground and find out, what do people think of that property? What is the market for that? The property that we bought, it was where the gangs lived. And, how did we know that? So, nice. Yeah. Right. Yep. And especially, the brokers just want you to think that their properties are beautiful. So now here come the warning signs. And they're out there, folks. Take it from experience. You go into these things with your eyes wide open. So let's talk trash here a little bit, Robert. Yeah, mailbox money. But please don't ever call me a guru. Please don't. Yeah, yeah. One of the things the reason why, I like working with you, Robert, is, we come at this from the same mindset of, what we call value in advance, where, you know, we want to help, we want to work with our clients first, get to know us, find out if we're the right fit before, you sign on to working with us. And that goes to, if anyone's in the call right now and you're looking at a repositioning deal and you're thinking that you're going to make an offer on it, pick up the phone and call Robert and say, hey, let me just run something past you. I mean, let us help you out before you even get yourself into any trouble. And that's the thing is, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And believe me, I see that all the time in my practice. There are so many people that if they just picked up the phone and called me for a 10-minute free phone call, I would have directed them entirely differently on what they would have done with that transaction, and probably would have saved them a ton of problems. So if you're thinking about repositioning, get to know Robert. Put him on your speed dial. Shoot him an email. He's there to help you out, and that's how he builds his practice. Hmm. Now, give us a story about this Indianapolis property. All right, let's talk about that for a second, because you raise an issue that for someone who I deal with acquiring property every single day, and if I looked at a rent roll and I looked at the lease up of a property that I'm looking to acquire, helping a client acquire, and I see that 60 units were leased in 1 week, that sends up a red flag to me. And I look at it and I think to myself, well, the guy was obviously just trying to put, any warm body in that particular place. Now, that's on the acquisition side. But if you're purchase a property and you're looking to do a repositioning and you want someone like you, Robert, to come in and load up the place, how can you protect yourself and your business from getting just another warm body in place? What do you do? That's great. Now, it's funny you mentioned something about what residents will say. I got a phone call from one of my property managers asking me if I had agreed to move a heating duct away from someone's bed to the other side of the room in order to lease the unit. And I hadn't been to the property in 3 months, and this guy had just moved in. I said, it wasn't me. He says, no. He says the owner told him he would move that heating duct for him. And I said, well, that guy's, coming up with lines because it definitely was not me. And sure enough, the guy was just trying to get out of the lease early. Is why he said it. So, hey, let me ask you another question. Let's say that you acquire a 150 unit property. You've got 15 buildings spread out across a complex. The property is 50% occupied, and you've got people in different units throughout the property. What would be the best way to go about, and the whole idea is you're going to get into these units and turn them and clean them up and get them moved on. Is it better to take everybody out of one particular building and work on a building at a time, or would it be better to work around the existing resident base and fix up the other units and then come back to their units? How would you handle that? Right. Yeah. That's a great point you raised about understanding the stock, the available stock of units that you have. We had one property that had about 6 different floor plans, and we had a problem. We couldn't get certain units leased, and we didn't even know until somebody sat down and did a complete audit that the units we couldn't get leased were all the exact same floor plan. They were our smaller 2 bedrooms. We were completely sold out of 1 bedroom units, and turning people away every day while we had about 50 other units that just were sitting there. So we realized that, geez, if we could just go back there and remarket these units as deluxe 1 bedrooms, or 1 bedrooms with a bonus room, then we could charge a little bit more, and in no time flat we had all of the units rented. So that's a great point about understanding what your stock is and its availability throughout the repositioning. You know, there's a question here from Christopher G. where he says, ever thought about using video during an application interview or lease signing, etc.? Virtually irrefutable and complete documentation. Plus, the digital video can be stored, organized, archived, clouded, and you know, one of the things that I've never thought about using something like that for the application process, but and this ties in with what you were just saying about out of state unit owners is you've got to, we haven't done it yet, but we've looked into it on a couple of properties, set up the webcams for different parts of the property. And you know, somebody gave a demonstration one time where you can put a webcam, you know, right. The guy was showing me right from his iPod. He could look at everything. He could turn the camera right from his iPad, and he could see everything that was going on the property. It all gets archived, all gets recorded, and it was the slickest thing I've ever seen. So haven't thought about it for videotaping the application interviews, but definitely, especially if you're an out-of-state owner, that is something you should put in the budget when you're going to buy that property. Hey, Christopher G is on a tear. Let me just read you this question that he just put up. Sometimes he gets intimidated out there by these big, smart, rich REITs and corporate real estate groups. Is this justified, or am I psyching myself out unnecessarily? Big, successful groups are just as boneheaded as anyone else. And Christopher, you are absolutely right. You know, bad decisions are made by everybody. So yeah, don't be intimidated. Believe me, that guy goes home every night and he's wondering whether he made the right decision or not himself. So yeah, we're all the same. Everybody's the same in this business. You know, there's no cutting edge stuff in the multifamily business. They've been renting units for thousands of years now. So believe me, these guys, they just have a lot more money and they're a lot more pizzazz, but they still have to make their numbers work just like everybody else. So, and look at, I mean, if you go through the CMBS database, if you go through and you look at some of these portfolios of properties that are going back to the lenders, because these REITs and these large corporate players purchased them at the wrong time for too much money, they're losing their whole entire portfolio. It'll be gone in the next year or two. And that's where, you know, an opportunity exists for the smaller players to go pick up some of these deals. Yeah. Yeah. A couple of questions for you. Let me just, there was one. What would you consider a full team for an out-of-state investor? Like say someone called you up, say, you know, somebody from Washington is looking to buy a property in Oklahoma. You know, this happens to be a case right now for a client. Let's say it's an 80-unit property. He's in Washington. You're in New York. The property's in Oklahoma. It's a repositioning deal. What he hasn't closed on the deal. He's starting the due diligence process. How would you interact with him? Right. Yeah. Yeah. One other question here is if for an out-of-state person looking to go in and do a due diligence in a property, should they hire who should they hire? What type of inspection team? And how much should that cost to do the due diligence? Here's the thing with due diligence. You've got to look at due diligence as essentially having two components. The first component is the financial due diligence. That can be done in your office back home. That means when you execute the contract, all the paperwork gets packaged together. Everything that's on the Schedule 1, as we call it with our letter of intent, and our purchase and sale, everything that's on the Schedule 1 gets shipped to your office, and for the first 2 weeks of the contract, you're going to go through the financial due diligence of that property with a fine-tooth comb. If it meets muster, if it turns out to be what they said it was, then the second phase of the due diligence is the physical due diligence, where you actually get somebody out there to the property that can take a look at the property unit by unit. Now, here's the thing. There are a couple of different ways to do it. I've done it where I've paid $40 per unit for a guy to go in and do everything, from the roof down to the foundation, inside every single cabinet of every single unit, and at the end of the day, I wrote him a check, and he gave me a nice 20-page report of what the property looked like. As I became more experienced in multifamily, I only hired a property inspector to go out there and do the physical plant type of analysis. Things I couldn't do, like the roof, the foundation, the HVAC, the furnaces, the chiller boiler system. All of those types of things is what I hired a property inspector for. My partners and I could go into each unit. We knew what we were looking for. We knew what we were trying to price out. We knew what type of damages we were looking for, and we didn't have to pay an inspector to go off and do all of that stuff. I can tell you right now, for the person that asked that question, everything is negotiable. So if you get a price from one inspector, find another one and see if you can get a better number from that other person. I think it was about $25 per unit is what some guys were charging. The last time I did a property inspection, I think it was about a 180-unit property, and it cost me $2,500 for the person to go and do the physical inspection of the exterior of the property. I did everything on the inside. So I hope I answered that question for you. Mm-hmm. Right. Hey, we're going to watch the time here. We're going to try to keep it down to an hour, so I'm just going to run through a couple of these final slides for you. But as people, if you have any questions, if you haven't discovered it yet, there's a box on the side of your screen. Using the GoToWebinar menu, you can type in a question, and I will share it with Robert. But I want to make sure we keep this down to an hour. So, Robert, why don't you help us with this, identifying some of the profit niches? That's great. Robert, one question is, what are some examples of physical things you can do that make major impacts? How do you decide what or which things to upgrade? Now, here's a question. How do you deal with and improve properties that are located in a higher crime neighborhood? And man, I know from personal experience, I know the answer to this question, but I'd love to hear what you have to say. Yeah, I mean, you talk about selective. I look at it, I've done it once. I'll never do it again. And I've learned my lesson. High crime area, that's not for me. I mean, you go in some of those areas, and I hear so many investors try to sell me on the fact that, oh, this neighborhood is changing. Oh, this area is being regentrified. Yeah, you know what? It's going to take 10 years for it to get to any different type of level, and it might never get there. And you don't have the time to wait for this neighborhood to come back. So, and like we were talking offline before, when you come into a neighborhood, especially if you're from out of town and you don't know the area all that well, one street away can make a huge difference in the value of your property. I mean, I've talked to some investors in Baltimore who say that. I know personally that that's the case in Cincinnati. Certain parts of Fort Worth are the same way. If you buy one street away, where you think you're getting into a good neighborhood, but you purchased, just down the road, the property has got a stereotype to it of being a bad property, and you're not going to be able to do anything to change that. Mm. Yeah. I'm going to just run through a couple of these questions before I get away from the presentation, because some of these questions are really good. This is from Richard asks, must the property be in a higher ranking neighborhood? For example, a C property in a B neighborhood. Does it make sense to try to reposition a B minus property in a B minus neighborhood? What are your thoughts on that? This is from one of my favorite friends here, Ken Lavisa. He says, how do you determine how fast you can get the vacancies leased up? And this is a great question, because when you're doing the analysis, and Ken happens to be an accountant, so I know where he's coming from, when you're doing the analysis and trying to come up with a budget for the repositioning and estimating your carrying costs, people sometimes get a little too aggressive in their analysis of how quickly they'll be able to get the rents up to an occupancy that they're projecting. What's a realistic formula, or what's a realistic way to look at how long it's going to take a property that needs to be repositioned at 50% occupancy all the way up to the market occupancy of, let's say, 90%? How do you determine that? Right, exactly. That's a great point. You have to understand when when the leasing season is for those properties. Here's. I just thought you got a kick out of this one. Hard to believe Robert is a property guy. He seems so mellow and laid back. Yeah, exactly. Wow. Now, Mike from Cincinnati says, and I know Mike owns a couple of properties up there in Ohio. He asked the question: when does it make sense to change the name of the property? This is a great point because we changed the name of one of our properties because it had such a bad connotation, and there was another property with an even worse reputation with a very similar name, and we turned it into a kind of like a game among the residents where whoever got the best name got 1 month's free rent, and everybody started really getting into it. But when does it make sense to change the name of the property? Now, Bob from Washington asks, what if any, is the downside of properties with a high efficiency or one bedroom unit mix? And I know the answer to this. I would love to hear what you have to say about it. What, if any, is the downside of properties with a high number of efficiencies or number of one bedroom unit mix? Meaning you have a lot more ones or efficiencies than you do twos or threes. Let's talk about some of these mind falls that we talked about. We want to get this in there before we end the call, so that people have a better understanding. I mean, some of the things that you and I had talked about before. Number one, of course, is finding out the problems before you buy the property. And new investors sometimes don't know where to look to find where the problems are. I can sit here and tell you war stories about things that owners tried to hide, but this is probably the first thing you need to walk around when you're looking to buy a property, is finding out what's out there beforehand. Um, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I can add to that. I mean, if we had a property that had, for the whole time that we're going through the due diligence, was showing up as 97% occupied, and 30 days after we bought the property, it was at 52% occupied, and not one moving van had ever moved up to take anybody out. So the existing owner, who happened to own property in the area, was taking leases from other properties and then sticking them into our rent roll to make it look like the property is at 97% occupied. And there are ways to protect against that. But if someone's going to try to commit fraud against you, they can always they'll always hide it as best they can. The other thing is what we were talking about, know the submarket. And this is kind of one of the things we talked about before, was things being one street away. And that's part of the problem, is that if you don't know the market all that well and you think you're buying in a great area, but the neighbors and all the other investors in that town wouldn't touch it, you might want to think twice before you jump into that repositioning deal. Yeah. Somebody asked a question, is repositioning like value add? And it absolutely is. Wouldn't you agree? Right. Yeah. Well, we have a question here. I think it's from Terry, where he asks that question: what is a typical profit margin on a repositioning deal as a percentage of the total project cost? That's a tough. The way the question is worded is tough to give you any type of concrete numbers. But maybe you can kind of share a little bit with what even just using it from a unit cost acquisition price to what ends up being the value of the property at the end, from your experience, Robert? Yeah, excellent. Um, Let me see. Yeah, somebody said naming. We're talking about naming the property. Make sure you don't have a similar name to a local housing project. Um, yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, let me see. Okay, do not mistake the map for the territory. It amazes me how many people have their noses buried in their precious spreadsheets but fail to see the most basic common sense dynamics. Like they said, garbage in, garbage out. Don't show me the pretty graphs, projections, and models. If the assumptions are dumb, the whole thing is irrelevant. And of course, trust but verify. And I think that you and I said that same thing. Perestroika. Trust but verify, and that's absolutely true. Um, so, you know, Oh no, yeah, it's those are. Let me just. I keep jumping back and forth here. This last screen. And before we wrap up the call, it just so happens that we have a question that's very similar to what we're talking about here. Somebody says we keep talking about the team, but who is on the team? Your attorney, your leasing manager, your maintenance person. I mean, who is it on the repositioning team? Right. And just so people understand how, Robert and I would work together, it really is my focus is on the deal analysis, helping you find the property, helping you negotiate the deal, structure the deal, draft the letter of intent. We draft the purchase and sale contract. And I say that we help you find the deals and get into a property. At the same time, one thing that we spend as much time on is keeping you out of bad deals. We see a lot of bad properties come across our desk that investors think looks nice, and we just really counsel them on what would happen if they were to purchase that property. So we want to make sure that our clients do well by buying well. But once we have got you set up with owning the property, if it is a repositioning opportunity, and that's been your strategy all along, during the acquisition process, we will bring Robert in to start working and looking at the numbers and coming up with a strategy so that when you transition to ownership, you're going to have everything in place right from the very beginning all the way through to success with essentially two different teams, my team and Robert's team. So that's what we mean when we talk about teams and how Robert and I interact with each other. And this last question here, this last comment that somebody made, so you're the guys that check to see how deep the water is. And the answer is yeah, that's exactly what we do. We jump in first to make sure that you're going to be able to swim all right. That's I like it. I'm probably going to use that one. So let's wrap it up today, Robert. I've received a lot of questions that I have not answered regarding how people work with you, what your costs are. What does it cost to hire a guy like you? I privately sent a message back to those people saying we're not talking price on this phone call. If you have any questions about price or working with Robert, please contact him directly. I think that's always the best way to do this. You let him find out what you're looking to do, and the main thing is see if he's the right fit for you. That's the key. So I think a conversation with him would be incredibly beneficial. So, but if you're on the call today, Robert is going to make time available for you. So, Robert, why don't you give out your contact information and a little bit more about what you're going to do for people? That's great. And folks, I obviously some of you on the call know me, work with me in the past. The type of people I work with. I cannot recommend Robert strongly enough. I think you kind of got the sense of how he operates, very low key, exactly the way I like to do business. Where if he's the right fit, give him a call. He's an easy guy to work with. So one final, let me just make sure that we don't have, so and also if any of you need to contact us, you can reach us at info@multifamilyinvestingacademy.com, or my personal email is charles@dobbinslaw, and Dobbins is spelled D as in dog, O, B as in boy, ENSLAW.com, Dobbins Law. Just send me an email. I'll be more than happy to talk to you about what you've got going on. So, hey, Robert, I got to thank you for doing this for us. I think it was a great call, very, very informative. I think we've piqued people's curiosity enough, and the key thing that I can stress out there is, folks, when you're, and I know a lot of you are doing this, and I know some of you don't have any experience in it, but if you're looking at repositioning opportunities, it's a great way to make a whole lot of money. Just make sure you know what you're doing, and if you don't know what you're doing while you're analyzing a deal, pick up the phone and call Robert. Pick up the phone and call me. Let's just talk about it and give you some direction as to how to proceed forward. So that is it, Robert. I want to thank you so much for your time, and I think we have a special gift for you, as we do for all of our guests. I'm only kidding. That's from the old thing. But I want to just thanks, and I hope everybody liked it. And we look forward. Next month we have one. We already have 2 webinars lined up for next 2 times. I don't know which one's going to be first. One of them is going to be on deal structuring, not on deal analysis, but on deal structuring. How do you take a kind of a crazy deal? We'll look at a couple of deals. How do you take a couple of crazy deals and structure an offer that'll satisfy what the owner is looking for? That's one of the upcoming webinars. Another webinar that we have coming up is with an actual asset manager for a lender who we're going to talk to about how do they approach restructuring notes, restructuring deals, how do they speak to investors who are looking to take over some property that's non-performing, and so we can really get a perspective from the bank's standpoint. That phone call is going to be fantastic. So please keep your eyes peeled for the invitations, and I want to thank everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Talk to you soon.